Now for take two, which is collection development rather than maintenance. And this is again by Ollie Crowd and Kayla Redcliffe. So we're going to start once again with policy. This one I'll go not more in depth, but I will talk about some different aspects of collection development policy to look at when you're looking specifically at selection rather than maintenance. What is collection development? Developing in a consortium and collection analysis and diversity audit are the things we are going to cover today. So collection policy is where we define what we are and what we're not. So it is the set of rules specifically saying this is what we select based on. You work within them to develop your collection. So what does your policy require of you? Who is your library collections audience? What criteria are used for selection and what criteria are not used for selection? When you're doing selection in particular, ask yourself some questions. How would somebody else without your background or coming in blind to your library, when you look at those criteria, how would they, what items might they select that fit those exact same criterias that are different from what you've been selecting? When you're making decisions about an inclusive and diverse collection, especially, use and not or, because what's representative for some people may be offensive for others. Neither of those people are wrong. I'm an extremely stereotypical white person, and that I require stereotypical white person representation. That said, a place on the shelf doesn't mean you support the author or the topic, just that this information exists in our society and that information needs to be presented. So that's when Kira was talking about having like the difference between a personal collection and a library collection, that's a major part of that difference is that for me personally, purchasing an item might be giving my money to an author I don't like or supporting a position I don't agree with. For me as a professional, purchasing for a library collection, it doesn't mean the same thing. It is a service I am providing for my community. So.
Okay, now that we've covered the importance of policies in developing your collection, and they are very essentially important, what exactly is collection development? Seems pretty simple, but it is a term that reflects the thoughtful process of developing a library collection in response to a library board, their mission, goals, budgetary concerns, and community or user needs and interests. So you have a couple of things to balance there. Collection development encompasses various responsibilities such as selecting, budgeting, planning and organizing, and communicating and reporting. Selecting materials for acquisition requires the selector to be knowledgeable of subject formats and the users for whom they are selecting for. This includes managing gift donations. Going back to policies, it's helpful to have a policy around donations to clarify what the library will and will not accept based on their collection development. You don't have to accept anything. Depends on what or how you're developing your collection. Budgeting requires managing and allocating an often limited collection budget that you may have to justify to your board. Establishing some flexible ratios, something kind of like fiction to nonfiction, you're spending a certain percentage on each and you can go down the collection. And then, yeah, just allocating what you're spending on each can be really helpful for being both or maintaining both that kind of like consistent development. We'll see an example where a ratio would have been helpful, and then to also justify spending. Friends groups and grants are very useful, although at times they may attempt to impede on the library's autonomy in collection development. So having a well set out plan for your grant is helpful, or just your collection development in general is really helpful to offset overly hands-on individuals, because these plans should directly tie into your implementation plan, your plan of service, your policies, all of these things, be aware of. That'll help you really keep people's hands out of your collection development. Planning and organizing falls into writing, updating policies to anticipate any change or like different people coming into the situation. And also coordinating development with in-house staff and our system. So Diane and the catalogers are a huge help. I'm pretty sure you're all aware of that. And then your consultants with the cataloging profile to ensure that everything flows correctly when it comes to hit your shelf. You're also going to have to coordinate, obviously, shelf space, and that goes back into withdrawing items. And then finally, communicating and reporting, you will have to promote, market, and provide any liaison or outreach activities with various committees and institutions within your community. Okay, next. So, ethical considerations are incredibly important in collection development. There's intellectual freedom more broadly, and then censorship and intellectual property and copyrights. Professional ethics is the behavior set forth by a profession, and for us, it's the ALA. The American Library Association has a code of ethics and multiple resources on censorship and intellectual freedom, as well as intellectual property that are linked in these slides, and Ollie is going to dig into them just a little more deeply.
So I have them slightly out of order. But, in the Code of Ethics, we advocate balance between the interests of information users and rights holders. So rights holders being the holders of that intellectual property. So one easy example with this is our ebook vendors. There's a lot of limitations on what access we can provide to protect the individual intellectual property rights of the authors and publishers. So know what our Canadian copyright laws are. This is a big one, actually, because there is enormous amounts of content on American stuff. Make sure if you're looking this up that you are using a reliable and Canadian source. Why stuff exists, how it applies to what you're doing. That free access that we provide, we have to always make sure that we are balancing this with protecting the rights of property owners. So, intellectual freedom is a huge one. So I want to talk a little bit about blind spots here because we all have them. Our brains are built on our own knowledge and experience. And as we gain more knowledge and experience, we start seeing more detail in some areas and others are still very general. So for me, that might look like I have a lot of experience with knitting. So if I'm developing a section with that little bit of everything, that subject would look like we need to have a basic how-to, we need to have something on color work, we need to have something on cabling, and we need to have something on lace. But then I remember woodworking exists, and I just put in a book that's got title woodworking because it's a topic in hobbies. Because I don't know the subject of woodworking well enough to say what the subcategories are. So I'm using hobbies as an example, but it's a very easy trap to fall into, even with more social topics like politics or health. Basically, when I'm developing a collection, I need to remember that I know more about certain subjects than other subjects, and compensate for that extra knowledge in some areas and lack of knowledge in others as I'm building my collection. So my biggest advice is ask yourself questions about your thoughts and decisions on what you're purchasing all the time. And remember, you are trying to represent our whole world and society in your collection. There's not ever going to be a perfect solution, but Kayla's going to go into, again, looking at your collection by Dewey Code. That's a really helpful tool. So did that come up under anti-censorship? So anti-censorship is making available the widest diversity of views and expressions. And that's going to mean purchasing and defending the materials you don't enjoy or agree with. And not every community member, including maybe your board members, will enjoy or agree with every choice. That's okay. You are a window to the world, and you and they don't have to like everything that happens outside the window. You need to keep the curtains open. One thing I do want to stress is that while it's your responsibility to choose and purchase a wide variety of materials, you do have a lot of help when it comes to defending those choices. We have some really great anti-censorship resources from ALA linked in that previous slide, a couple back. And we can also help you and your board to review your policies so that they support you with practical processes to defend your collection from challenges if you need to. And
we're gonna jump from all of the ethical considerations to kind of think about reality in developing within a consortium. So this is a cooperative project, and this project really seeks to build complementary collections from which other libraries within our system and track can draw from. This is going to impact budget lines. Oh yeah, no, you can go to the next one.
Okay.
And can really impact kind of like where your holes are. Holes are, I'm saying holes while reading holds. It's getting complicated in my mind. Okay. Central to kind of understanding your role within a consortium is holds reports. So they're just generally essential to development anyways, but they're even more important within a consortium. Holds reports give you insight into your patrons' information needs and preferences. They can also indicate where there may be holes within the library collections as your patrons seek to fulfill their information needs elsewhere outside of your library. So if you have a ton of holds, it could potentially indicate a problem. It might not. It's a helpful service, but you want to be on top of your holds and all of this data just to see if it's actually representing a problem. But you want to know what your patrons are borrowing outside of your collection, and you want to ensure that you are lending items out to other libraries to kind of balance those two things. So often development within a consortium comes down to budgetary concerns. You will have to balance your library's goals, such as increasing the browsability and thus drawing more patrons into your library. So having items on your shelves versus direct searches and hold pickups that don't really necessarily bring in a lot of patrons to kind of like linger around. Those are kind of things you're going to decide between. You're also going to have to consider things like customer service goals around delayed versus instant access. You might want to bring in things like Libby in this case. Check if there's an ebook, because that's going to bring in that instant access. And then most importantly, you will have to manage your status as a net borrower versus a net lender. So being a team player within a consortium means that being a net lender is a preferable position. And you'll have heard me or James or Ollie or one of your consultants, somebody say those words, net borrower or net lender. So the rule of thumb is if there are a large number of copies within track, you can decide to forego the purchase of that particular item. However, if there is a number of holds across a collection, let's say you were noticing a trend of like fiction titles being placed on hold from your specific patrons, that might indicate that there is something going on with your fiction collection and you might want to start developing. You might be missing something. There could just be a hole there, or you might start seeing that you don't have a lot of content in an area and there's a bunch of holds being placed. Maybe it's like video games or graphic novels. I've noticed graphic novels quite often. And it's just something that you haven't really developed a lot, but your patrons are wanting those items. So you might want to look into developing those collections as a whole. One really important to note to kind of point out as a caution with holds reports that could pop up with, but even if you're talking to patrons, do not start an entire collection for one single patron. Collections made up of only the items they like to put on holds. These items may only circulate the one time and create a small, incomplete, and unused collection. In particular, also do not purchase requests if they fall outside of your library's mission and collection policy. This can fall into things like academic texts because they're super expensive, might not circulate very often, not part of a public library's mandate. There's Relay, rely on that for those holds. So you're going to be kind of bringing in holds as a service to fill in areas where you aren't going to want to develop, but you also have to kind of also be mindful of being that lender as well. So with an eye on being a lender first, and being a net lender rather than a net borrower, one of the ways to help increase your lending statistics and just overall CIRC stats, because the CIRC statistics in the reports that we show you are actually a tally for that single item, and it doesn't mean it was necessarily checked out at your library. It could have been checked out anywhere in track. So be aware of that when you're purchasing these items. You'll still get that CIRC count. But the holds purchase alert report is super useful because it lists titles that are requested frequently but have too few items to meet the demand throughout track. So the items shown in this report may not be items that your patrons specifically have requested, as it shows track-wide hold requests, and there is absolutely no way to make it that distinction, unfortunately, like with this specific report. But if those items fall within your collection development plans, purchase them. Totally fine. If it already falls within things that you would regularly purchase anyways, your items would get the circulation statistics and you will be fulfilling your track obligations to lend to other consortium members. If you decide to purchase them, they will more than likely go to fill those holds for all of track before they ever hit your shelves. But yeah, it's going to help you with those lending numbers a little bit if you're falling behind, if you've already been told that you're a net borrower and you might want to work on that. I know James has been announcing it. Okay, you pop over. The next report is going to be specific to your patrons and what they like. So this one is pulled from Simply Reports, but you can pull these reports from Polaris as well. And I have a handout for this that will supply. These reports, of course, are going to give you data on your patrons' information preferences and help you start to identify any holes in your collection. So you're going to take this data alongside other data points that come up in this presentation, and you can start comparing and seeing, again, what's going on, determining whether or not to order these holds. If you are a net borrower, one of your issues to help kind of balance the net borrower, net lending aspect out is to address those holes in your collection, to entice your patrons to actually borrow the items in your collection rather than going outwards. So here's some parameters for a holds report that you can pull. It's a hold count report. And then if you pop over to the next one, there is the filters. It's for anything, it'll tally up the requests. So you're not getting just like one, like each request, it'll just condense them all into like, whichever title. 4-wing right now is a big one. It has like 13 requests, let's say. It'll tally that all up for you. You want to do active, it won't give you a count if you don't do active on this. And if you pop over to the next one, this is this report. I put it into a pivot table and I organized it via the browse title and then the browse author. To note, almost every data point outside of the title, browse title, may have missing information. So you'll notice that the authors has a blank category there. Often holds requests have limited data. DVDs never have an author, so you're always going to have a blank anyways. But you can fill in that missing data to get a better picture if you wish. You can use the audit tools that I'm going to go through later on in order to do that, so that you can get a better sense of the various top titles, authors, subjects, formats, anything you want to kind of know. And then you can kind of start judging where you would put it in a collection to see where it's, where those kind of like trends are happening, because you're not going to get all of that data in these reports, unfortunately. Just holds have limited data. So you have a slight bit of work to do. Pop over. And on that, we're going to jump into collection analysis. So collection analysis, and I'm going to break this down a bit more than I did in the last presentation, contains both assessment and evaluation. Assessment seeks to determine how well the collection supports the goals, needs, and mission of the library. And then evaluation seeks to examine or describe collections in their own terms. And if you have the data, which we don't currently have, you can compare it in relation to other collections. Essentially, you want to answer the following questions. Is the collection meeting objectives? How well is it serving its users? In which ways or areas is it deficient? What remains to do concerning development? To answer these questions, you'll be using two main measures. So your collection's utility, or how well it is satisfying its purpose, and its quality, or in which ways the areas of the collection is deficient. Okay, another note on this: collection analysis is an ongoing process. The most essential aspect of collection analysis is the fact that it is an ongoing process. Every report that is pulled, I mentioned this, including the Holds reports we just went over, is based on data that consistently changes. It is not a one-time project. Collection analysis is defined by both the constant attention to collection quality and its responsiveness to the user community. And the only way to progress towards kind of any kind of goal is in having information about the collection's current state. So you need to know where you are in order to just move forward. So we're going to break down collection techniques really quickly. So there are two main categories of techniques within evaluation and assessment, and that's quantitative and qualitative. Quantitative collection analysis counts things, anything, it's just a count. So simply reports is in nature quantitative. It's usually viewed as more reliable, although as we've pointed out in various areas, statistics are not always perfect. And then qualitative analysis considers either the intrinsic worth or correctness of the collection or its ability to meet user needs and library goals and priorities. We won't be addressing the qualitative techniques in today's session, but future sessions may focus on those techniques, which can include user opinion surveys, user observation, which sounds super creepy, and focus groups. These studies are usually concerned with what the user's expectations, needs, and perceptions are. If you want to pop to the next one, we're going to do the quantitative. So we are back to this beautiful collection overview report. This is a quantitative measure that also does user-based and collection-based analyses. So we're trying to understand the collection itself as well as our users through how they use the collection. So Simply Reports allows us to pull circulation data, which shows that user data, and then in-house use data, also again user data. And then it also does the quantitative data, so you can pull various measures such as growth, size, age, depth, budget allocations. Particularly if you're pulling this over time, you can see all of those developments. Okay, if you want to pop to the next, this is the filters again, just to really nail it in. Again, LSB was just for convenience sake, but always do final on anything that is an item. Simply reports your record final. Otherwise, you're getting deleted items and things that no longer even exist in Polaris in that report, and that's not helpful. Okay, so we're back to this particular report of circs versus total number of items in your collection. But this time we're going to focus on the green highlighted collections, which are showing a need for development. A few things to be mindful of are DVDs and children's items. DVDs have a short loan period, which bumps up circ counts because of renewals, so it makes them look potentially far more popular than they actually are. If you're comparing that to a book versus a DVD, I think DVDs are 7 days and a book's 21 days. The circ counts are going to be different just by virtue of that on renewals, because renewals get counted into circ counts. And then children's items, particularly for in-house use, just simply because they like to pull items off of shelves. That doesn't mean they're doing anything with them. They could just be putting their arm in the shelf and pulling them off. So you can be a little conservative in terms of checking these items in for in-house use. So let's, for example's sake, focus on the graphic novels in this area. It's showing a lot of need for development. Makes up almost 3% of the total items within the collection, but accounts for 8% of the total circs. So it's indicating that those items are being used more than twice. Like they're getting checked out quite often, which is going to start indicating that they might get grubby pretty quickly. So they're going to pop on a weeding list, but you're also going to want to replace them. But it's also clear that patrons are starting to heavily use the graphic novels collection. And so you are going to want to start to meet that demand. So you could use this information and go and ask Diane for a list of top items for each of the green collections, let's say, so that you can have kind of like an ordering plan going on. I would still hit up your top ones like fiction and nonfiction as well, because they are your top performing, even though they do require weeding. And then you can also kind of like expand each of these collections. If I don't have a visual for this, but if you had the Excel in here, you can expand each one of those collections and see all of the authors and titles, so you can get a better understanding of your collection's performance and depth. You will want to pay attention to the average age of your collection as well. We've talked about this, but if we want your collection to fall ideally within a range of 5 years, and so you can always look into updating collections if that's where you want. I should probably mention here, I think I have it somewhere else, but it's totally fine to have collections that you don't really develop. There's some like orange colored ones there. Some of them are just kind of like interlibrary loan pop up randomly and aren't really anything, but there's other ones that might just kind of stay where they are. You don't always have to develop every single collection. You just want to be able to justify why you're not developing it. Pop over to the next one. Okay, we're back to the first available date. You'll notice that these two are really, really helpful reports just for seeing what's happening. Gives you a really good sense of the history of development at your library. So one thing though to be mindful of, and I have one library where this we can run into problems with data. If there's been huge organizational changes, as in you're moving all of your items from one collection into another collection, or moving them around, it's going to completely skew your data. So just be mindful of if you've sat down with your consultant and like really done an overhaul of your collection profile, that could mess up your data for a solid year. But you can see where the development is on this one. This one hasn't been messed with, so it's good. And you can see where development is lacking or where development is changed. So this is really interesting. Ollie actually asked me this question earlier, and I just want to point out, red doesn't necessarily mean bad. This isn't like a destroy all the red and only focus on the green. It's just showing you that like some collections are very I wouldn't say underdeveloped. They're not often developed. And that can be okay. It might be a problem, like the graphic novels here. That could be a problem looking back at the other data that we just looked at, where those items are being heavily used, but there hasn't been the appropriate amount of development. So that could indicate a problem, but maybe you don't, like, again, maybe they're just areas you don't frequently develop, and that's okay. Okay, so a very interesting detail on this report, and you can see it if you have any changes for yours, is to look at the fiction and nonfiction, and you'll see that in the last few years, the nonfiction budget was cut substantially and put towards, I'm assuming the budget, at least the development, and it was put towards the fiction budget. Looking back at the age of the nonfiction collection, which was 2012, that was not necessarily the best plan. So ratios would have been really helpful here, just to create some, you can see that over like, what was it, a 10-year period, it was fairly consistent and stable, although fiction has had like a pretty significant growth looking at this now, just over time, and then vice versa from nonfiction is just descended. Ratios will help stabilize that kind of thing a little bit more, so that you're consistent and not like playing into user need is great. It really is, but you also have to be aware of that, again, that window, and ensuring that you have a breadth. So you need both breadth and depth. We'll mention that a few times. Ratios will help you kind of maintain that. Okay, pop over to the next one. This is your Dewey Codes again. It's going to show you your highest circulating topics. And so I just warned you not to like totally lean into that area, but you are going to want to develop that area because there is interest in it. So you're going to want to get the like new stuff, the interesting stuff, have a solid core collection there of frequently checked out items. But sorry, I should get some water here. You can also get an idea of how to spread your collection data or your ratios, let's say. So you can go and look at the sum of the price and just see where spending has traditionally fallen. And you can start working out kind of ratios based off of percentages of where you're going to allocate money. Maybe it's like one title a year, whatever it may be, or every 2 years. This one also helps give you a really good idea on just user base and on your user base and their preferences. So when we pull in census data, it can be really interesting looking at like industry and versus your circulation with nonfiction. Sometimes those two things correlate quite often. Sometimes they completely don't, but occasionally they can. And then it also can give you a really good idea of things like what to buy in your library of things. What if, I don't know, 641 is diets, I believe. Cooking.
I think.
Yeah, and so you can bring in cooking, various, like, I don't know, cake pans, whatever else you'd bring in for food related library of things. Those, you could introduce them slowly and see how they perform, but that might be something that's popular. If you have like 635 for gardening is a really big thing, various gardening tools might be handy. Look at what's already happening and what your users are already interested in, and then you can kind of develop ideas from that. It's a jumping off place. You can be a little creative. Okay, and then the first available date for your nonfiction. This one can be really illuminating. This one's super long because you're going down the whole list of Dewey Codes to 900, so you have to scroll, so it's not as easy to see everything. I've tried moving like the dates to the other side and then you had to scroll like lengthwise. It's not as perfectly beautiful as the other one, but it does give you that kind of sense of where development's been. You can see if there's been a problem, like in past we've had library managers not develop a certain area. So this kind of helps you check what Ollie was discussing for intellectual freedom. If you're not developing an area, maybe because there was some sort of unknown bias that was going on. You weren't aware of it, and that's okay. But this will highlight those potential issues, because you'll go, oh, that was never developed. Why wasn't that never developed? If you've been the library manager for a long time, you might go, oh, I actually know nothing about that subject. I can see why I never developed that thing. If it was somebody else, you can only guess. Maybe we have had issues with people being very religious and then not wanting to develop, let's say, things based on science, which can be a significant problem for censorship and intellectual freedom. And then this will also give you a sense on whether or not you might have that depth versus breadth. So the ones that garner public interest are going to have more depth because you're going to be treating them, these are alias, whereas more as like a fiction collection. You're going to have those core items and kind of like the top authors, and then you're going to have items where there's more just that breadth, but there's it's not going to be as well established. You're going to want to try and get a little bit of core in all of them, but again, you can't always develop absolutely everything. You're going to want to hit the like really broad stuff for all of the categories, and just try and keep it updated and have the like relevant information in there, not just, as Ollie was saying, like the most general textbook on woodwork. You want a couple of like fundamental things for woodworking that exist. Okay, the next is the top authors. This one, again, is a pivot table, and I've organized it with the items versus circs, because occasionally you may think that an author is really popular, but in reality their items are like read once and then never touched again, and then you suddenly have like a ton of, I don't know, James Patterson, let's say, but it's not really circulating very much, so you might want to weed. This isn't showing that, but I have seen it.
We could weed it a little. You can always weed James Patterson.
I think Alia has something against James Patterson.
Lifelong grudge, yes.
I feel it. I really feel it. But this one, for the most part, is showing a lot of development. They're popular authors. Williams Moe, if you were to look at their holds list, I'm pretty sure Williams Moe is the top one. I think going to be on there as well. So they're like wanting to purchase a lot of that content. Okay, we're gonna pop over and jump into census data. This is, I'm going to warn you, all of this is quite the whirlwind because we are covering a lot of ground.
Kathy just asked, how can you tell they are popular? So if these are sorted by
it is, so it has
most, so this percentage here is, it's taking the total of every single circulation in a year, and out of every single circulation, books by Mo Willems were responsible for 0.5% of every single circulation of this library.
Yeah, you can just organize it via year-to-date cert counts. So it'll be from January 1st of this year to the date that you pull it. So if you were to then look at that data like 3 months later, the data will have changed because it's year-to-date as of the date you pull. That's why I keep saying it's an ongoing process to evaluate this. And then it's really helpful if you compare between year-to-dates and the previous year cert count, which is a little more stable because it's accounting for an entire year. That year-to-date, often when I pull these things for my library managers, it's in the middle of the year. So we're only 6 months in and not that full year. So they might not have the same stats. Sometimes they're showing like for half a year already outpacing what it did the year before. Then you're like, okay, that's become incredibly popular. There's a couple of ways to see popularity via those circ counts. Okay, let's pop over to census data. A large part of analysis is just knowing your community. It's so essential to know your community. And a really easy way to start is your census data. Census data is a valuable resource for various uses, for collection development, services, marketing, policy development, and more. I'm pretty sure you could think of basically everything. It is so freaking useful. Okay, pop over one more. So you can use census data to create segments or user profiles. And this is extremely valuable as data points in themselves, and also as jumping off points to tailor further data collection. So you could do something like income or household or family characteristics, and then break those down, or such as like 20, 30 to like, you can make these. I only have like 3 little options there, but it was because I ran out of space. You can put all of the options that you can find on a census, like that have data points for your community, and then start building out kind of like a user profile. Like what are their various needs are going to be different for these user bases. So somebody in the 20 to 30K renting is going to have a very different need of, let's say, your library of things than somebody who's in the 100K plus and a homeowner with a lot of storage. They already own all of what they need. They have different needs. And so you're going to want to determine what the various needs are, and you're going to try and want to hit a lot of them. Another thing you can do is do industry education level. That's really helpful for your nonfiction. You can do ethnicity, languages, age, gives you like the various, English, Ukrainian, French, which also happens to be English, Ukrainian, French for language, or like children, teens, seniors, adults. We already do that. And then you can also do this via subjects as well, which we're going to touch on in a minute. So you can do like sci-fi, fantasy, mystery. This allows you to build user profiles, generate questions for focus groups, surveys, or tailor collection development and marketing. Or it can be used to create templates for auditing your collection, such as a diversity audit, which is more or less what we have done. So what is a diversity audit? It is essentially a quantitative collection-based analysis of each of the items within your library collection. At its core, it is simply a tally of the authors and main characters' identity characteristics and topics represented in your collection. This one's a little more hands-on. It's a bit of work, but audits are super useful. Why audit your collection? An audit will give you additional data that you can't pull through simply reports, which can help strengthen your collection. Doing an audit around diversity will help avoid stereotypes and build both diverse and inclusive collections. So here are a few questions to ask about your collection if you are on the fence regarding a diversity report. If you're kind of like, do I need to? Are most of your books about Indigenous people historical? Who is represented in your LGBTQ+ collection? Do most of the books in your collection about BIPOC characters take place in urban areas or are about immigration? Are your books about marginalized people, written by marginalized people? Do the authors, characters, and stories within your collection reflect the reality of minority populations in your community? Or is your collection written by a lot of white people? Next.
Yeah, it went the wrong way. There.
Yeah, you went backwards. Okay, just a really quick, it's important to make a distinction between these two things, inclusive versus diverse. Everyone is participating means that it's inclusive versus everyone is represented, which is diverse. So you could have some white authors writing about the world, and that's diverse. But inclusive means that you have, Indigenous people writing stories. You have Korean people writing stories. They don't have to necessarily be their only personal story, but just they're represented as authors within the collection. So you need to ensure that it's both inclusive and diverse. Okay, so how to perform very quickly. We're gonna blaze through this. If you want to pop, because we're gonna try and hit question time. Before you start an audit, ensure that you've weeded your collection. Always make sure you do that first before a lot of things. Inventory, I argue that all you might have a different take, but I say get rid of the stuff before you're going to account for it, because why? You don't want to put all of that effort into researching items that no one checks out anyways, that you're just going to get rid of. You may want to work collection by collection or shelf location by shelf location, or for like nonfiction, so subject by subject, if you really want to like make it condensed and feasible. You will be researching each title and you will be tallying or recording your findings in the template we're going to supply. And then after you pulled all of the data, you will be applying your findings meaningfully within your collection. So to audit, you will need data, which will include the data from the collection overview report, as well as census data, which you can then use to compare and see where those holes are and what your community looks like, what your library collection currently looks like. And then you'll do this and you'll go, wow, none of this is really kind of like matching. You're also going to need the audit template, which we are going to provide, a computer and some help. You can use other census data as well. So we're using like StatsCan's census data from the recent census, but your municipality might have even more granular data that you might want to bring in. Totally acceptable. So just plug in the information into a template. You want to pop over? Yes, sorry. Thank you for clarifying that, Joanne. This is what the audit template and Simply Reports data look like together. You were going to have to search for subjects yourself. Unfortunately, Simply Reports does not let us pull that data, and it infuriates me endlessly. What I did was I just copied and pasted the collection item year to date. I think I have item year to date in-house, the ISBN, browse author, sort title, call number, publication date, and then I just pasted it in here. And then the template exists. And this one, I think it's for authors. I have authors, content, and then I believe subjects broken down. So you could go like white, cis, straight, able-bodied, and then there's marginalized, male, female, and then it breaks it down further so you can start tallying who the author is. And if you jump to the next slide, this is these are some really helpful areas where you can do more research. So Novelist Plus, super freaking useful. That also helps for collection development. It has really great selection lists, and then also the read-alikes are super helpful if those are developed for an item. And then so you can pull super easily the subjects there. Goodreads is helpful. You can get a good idea of what the content is and the subjects as well. Author bios, you can go to social media or website. You can go via the author themselves if they have a website, or the publisher, to find out more information on the author. And then you can also look at the item's book jacket so that you can start filling this in. Finally, count the results and calculate the percentage that each category makes up of the total whole. I think that template should tally. I'm going to double check it before I send it out. It might not work perfectly, but I'll try and make it work. So once that's all kind of tallied up, you can insert a pivot table to create graphs and visualizations. If anyone knows me at this point, I'm pretty sure you all know that I really like visualizations and graphs. It helps highlight meaningful data and findings. So I fully support doing that. And then finally, you're going to identify where your collection currently fits within the library's strategic plan and how it compares to the census data, what you have. Then use the data to fill the holes you've identified within your collection. And you have a really solid plan for development. It's a little work. You want to pop over? I've given you a lot of information quite quickly, but we have a little bit of time to ask questions. I'm going to give you some time to digest because yes, that was a lot of information and we blazed through it. Do not be afraid to ask questions on this.